Imagine waking up 50,000 years ago, on the cold ground before the sun. There is a fire near you and a few sleeping bodies and a whole world with no walls, and then you feel it. The oldest, most ordinary feeling a body can have. You need to go. So you sit up in the dark. And here is the strange part. There is no bathroom. There is no door to close, no light to flick on. There is no toilet, no pipe, no flush, no soft white roll of paper waiting on a shelf. There is just you, the cold air, and the urge that will not wait. Every single human who has ever lived has faced this exact moment. Billions of them, every day for hundreds of thousands of years. And for almost all of that time, there was no such thing as a bathroom at all. So where did they go? What did they squat over? And what did they wipe with? How did a wandering animal that left its waste in the grass ever end up building marble seats, clay pipes, and rushing underground rivers just to deal with the one thing none of us can avoid? This is a story about the most universal act there is, and about the moment it quietly turned into the most dangerous problem we had ever faced. So let's go back, all the way back, to the world before the toilet. This is how ancient humans went to the bathroom. To understand the toilet, you first have to understand a world with no toilet at all. For almost the entire human story, we did not live in one place. We were hunter-gatherers, walking the land in small bands, following the herds, the seasons, and the ripening plants. We slept in one valley this month, and a different valley the next. And when nature called, the answer was beautifully simple. You walked a little away from the others. You crouched down and you went. Then you stood up, and eventually the whole band moved on. This is exactly what almost every animal on Earth still does. A wolf does not build a latrine. A deer does not dig a sewer. For a small group of people spread thin across a huge landscape, the waste they left behind was a tiny thing the world quietly absorbed. Rain washed it. Insects and beetles broke it down. Sun and soil and time erased it within a season. There was no pile, because the people were never still long enough to make one. Think about how much that one fact shaped daily life. You never worried about plumbing because there was nothing to plumb. You never cleaned a toilet because the whole open world was the toilet, and you simply used a different patch of it each time. There were unspoken rules, of course, not too close to camp, not upstream from where the band drank. Even without any science of germs, people learned the hard way that you do not foul the water you are about to put in your mouth. That lesson is so old it may be older than language itself. And there was privacy, in its way, just made of distance instead of doors. You walked behind a ridge, or into the tall grass, or beyond the trees. The bathroom was wherever you could not be seen, and it moved with you wherever you went. For tens of thousands of years, this just worked. A thin scattering of people, always moving, leaving almost nothing behind. The ground swallowed the evidence, and the band walked on toward the next camp. But almost nothing is not quite the same as nothing, because in a few rare, dry, sheltered places, the evidence did not rot, and it did not wash away. It dried out, and it waited for thousands and thousands of years. And when archaeologists finally found it, that ancient, hidden waste turned out to be one of the greatest treasures the human past has ever handed us. It sounds like a joke, but it is completely serious. One of the most valuable things an archaeologist can find is a piece of ancient human poop. When it dries out and hardens and survives the centuries, scientists give it a politer name. They call it a coprolite. Most waste vanishes within weeks, but in the right place, a bone-dry cave, a desert, a frozen ground, it can turn tough and leathery and last for thousands of years. And locked inside it is a near-perfect snapshot of a single ancient day. In the Paisley Caves, in the high desert of Oregon, researchers found dried human waste tucked into the dust of the cave floor. When they dated it, the numbers were astonishing. Some of it was around 14,000 years old. That is older than farming, older than pottery, older than almost anything we usually call history. It is some of the earliest solid evidence of people in the Americas at all. And it survived because one person, one ordinary morning, went to the bathroom in a dry cave. And these humble little time capsules are packed with information. Inside a coprolite, scientists can find the seeds and bones of the last meal, telling us exactly what a person ate on a particular day, right down to the wild plants and animals of that single season. They can pull out ancient DNA, both human and from the food, and even read the tiny ecosystem of microbes that once lived in that person's gut. A single dried specimen can describe a meal, a body, and a vanished way of life. But coprolites also reveal something far less pleasant. They are full of the eggs of worms. Tucked inside ancient waste, researchers keep finding the eggs of parasites, the roundworms, the whipworms, the tapeworms that have ridden along inside human bodies for an extremely long time. These freeloaders are among our oldest and most loyal companions, and the parasites carry a hidden message of their own. When people roamed in tiny scattered bands, these worms were a nuisance, but a limited one. There simply were not enough people, packed closely enough, for the eggs in one person's waist to easily reach the next. So the ancient world was, in a strange way, fairly clean, not because people knew anything about germs, but because they were too few, too spread out, and too constantly on the move. Which raises the very first practical question of this whole story. When you squat in that open, wandering world, and you finish, there is no paper, no plumbing, no sink. So what exactly did ancient humans reach for to clean themselves? Here is a question you have almost certainly never asked, and now you will never be able to unask it. For nearly all of human history, there was no toilet paper. It is a shockingly recent comfort, modern and soft and easy to forget. For tens of thousands of years before it, every human being had to solve the same small, urgent problem with whatever was at hand. And the honest answer is that they used almost everything. Out in the wild, the world itself was the supply. Soft leaves were a favorite when the right plant was within reach. Handfuls of grass, clumps of moss, a twist of dry hay. In cold places, a fistful of clean snow. In warm places, a rinse of water from a stream. People near the sea sometimes used smooth shells, scraping rather than wiping. People in dry lands used soft sand or a worn, rounded stone. Across the Americas, dried corn cobs became a famous and surprisingly effective tool, kept in a basket and used again and again long after the kernels were gone. But the most revealing clues come from the ancient Mediterranean, because the Greeks and Romans left their bathroom habits in the archaeological record. They used small, flat fragments of broken pottery, smoothed at the edges. Scholars call these pieces pessoa, and you find them worn round from use. Imagine reaching not for a soft roll, but for a curved shard of an old clay pot. And here the story turns wonderfully human. Sometimes those broken shards had names scratched on them, because shards of pottery were also used as ballots and notes. So now and then a person would wipe themselves with a piece bearing the name of someone they truly despised. It may be the oldest insult in the world that we can still hold in our hands. The Romans, with their crowded public toilets, had another tool entirely. It was a sea sponge fixed to the end of a long stick. You would reach down, clean yourself, and rinse the sponge in a little channel of running water or vinegar at your feet. And in a busy public latrine, that sponge on a stick was often shared. The same one passed quietly from stranger to stranger, all day long. It was practical, it was clever, and by our standards, it was a perfect way to pass an unpleasant little gift around an entire city. Leaves, moss, snow, shells, stones, corn cobs, pottery, a shared sponge. The tools were endless, but the deeper truth underneath them was always the same. As long as people kept moving, none of this mattered very much. But people were about to stop moving. They were about to settle down, build walls, and stay in one place for good. And the moment they did, this small, simple, private act became the most dangerous thing in the entire village. Around 12,000 years ago, humanity made the biggest change in its history. We began to farm. Instead of following the food across the land, we planted it and waited. We tamed animals, raised crops, and built the first permanent homes. For the first time, people stayed in one place, year after year, generation after generation. It gave us almost everything we now call civilization, but it also handed us a problem our wandering ancestors had never truly faced. When you never leave, your waste never leaves either. It piles up exactly where you live, eat, sleep, and drink. Picture a village that grows from a few huts into a crowded town. The same families, on the same patch of ground, for hundreds of years. Now multiply one body's daily waste by hundreds of people, day after day, in a place no one ever walks away from. This is where those tiny parasite eggs become a quiet catastrophe. In a moving band, an egg in your waste rarely found a new home. But in a dense, settled village, it had a short and easy journey. From the ground to a hand to the water to a mouth to the next gut. The very stillness that built the town also built a highway for disease. When archaeologists study the soil and the ancient latrines of these early settlements, they find that parasite eggs become far more common after people settle down. The worms thrived in the new closeness. Farming did not just grow more crops, it grew more disease. And these were not gentle visitors. Waste in the water spread the kinds of illness that empty a body in days. Cholera and dysentery, fevers and constant gut infections, the silent killers that, across history, slew more people than any war. The cruel part is that nobody could see the cause. There was no idea of germs, no notion of microscopic eggs or invisible life. A child sickened and died, and no one could point to the real culprit, which was simply waste, sitting too close to the people who made it. So humanity faced a brand new kind of challenge, one it had never needed to solve in all the long ages of wandering. How do you take the one thing every single body produces, every single day, and move it away from where everyone lives, before it quietly kills you? The open landscape had been the answer for 100,000 years. Now the landscape was a town, and the old answer was gone. The first people to truly solve this would change human life forever. So who built the very first toilet? The answer takes us to some surprisingly old and surprisingly clever places. Travel to the far north of Scotland, to a windswept cluster of islands called Orkney. There, half buried in a sand dune, sits a stone village called Skara Brae. It is around 5,000 years old, older than the Egyptian pyramids, and the people there built their homes entirely from stone. Inside the walls of those houses, archaeologists found small recesses, little stone cubicles connected to channels, drains cut into the village. Many believe these were among the earliest indoor toilets ever found, small private spaces with drains designed to carry the waste away from the home. Far to the south and east, in the land between the rivers, in ancient Mesopotamia, people were solving the same problem more than 4,000 years ago. They built seats above deep shafts and pits, sometimes lined with stacked rings of clay to soak the waste down into the earth. But the true masters of early sanitation lived along the Indus River, in cities like Mohenjo-Daro, more than 4,000 years ago. And what they built there is, frankly, breathtaking. Many ordinary homes had their own private toilet, a brick seat built against an outer wall. And that toilet did not just empty into a pit. It connected to a drain, which connected to a covered sewer beneath the street. Their cities ran with networks of brick channels, carrying dirty water and waste out and away from the homes, along streets laid out in careful grids. It was one of the first great sanitation systems in the world, built by people who somehow understood that waste had to be moved far from the living. And on the island of Crete, in the grand palace of Knossos, the Minoans took one more remarkable step. They built a toilet with a wooden seat, set above a drain washed clean by water poured from above. It was, in effect, an early flushing toilet, using the simple, brilliant power of running water to carry the problem away. This was happening around 3,500 years ago, in a palace by the sea, long before anything we picture as modern plumbing. So the toilet was not the invention of one genius on one bright morning. It was discovered again and again by different peoples, on different rivers, each one staring at the same dangerous pile and reaching the same conclusion. Build a seat, dig a drain, send it away with water if you can. These were quiet revolutions, made of stone and brick and clay, but the most social, most crowded, and strangest toilets of the ancient world were still to come, and they belonged to Rome. To a modern person, the Roman public toilet is almost impossible to imagine. We treat going to the bathroom as the most private act there is, a locked door, a quiet moment alone, strict, unspoken rules of personal space. The Romans would have found that whole idea deeply strange. In a Roman city, you would visit a public latrine called a forica. Picture a long stone bench running around the walls of a room, with a row of round holes cut into it, side by side, and on those holes sat people, many people, all at once. There were no walls between them, no partitions, no stalls, no privacy at all. You sat elbow to elbow with complete strangers and you talked. About business, about gossip, about the news of the day. Going to the bathroom was a social event, a place to meet and chat. Beneath that long bench of holes ran a constant channel of flowing water, carrying everything away in a steady stream. And in another little channel, in front of your feet, ran clean water for rinsing that shared sponge on a stick we met before. All of this fed into the pride of Roman engineering, the great sewers. The largest in Rome itself was the Cloaca Maxima, an enormous underground channel that drained the city's waste and water. Parts of it still run beneath the streets of Rome today, thousands of years later. It looks at first like a total triumph. Public toilets, running water, sewers, even early public baths. Surely the Romans, with all this plumbing, were the cleanest, healthiest people of the ancient world. And here is the twist that researchers uncovered. They were not. When scientists studied the parasites in Roman latrines and Roman-era remains, they expected all that sanitation to show fewer worms and less disease. Instead, they found that intestinal parasites were just as common as before, and in some places, they actually seemed to have spread even further under Roman rule. How could that be, with all those sewers and baths? The answer is hidden in the details of daily life. The water in those shared latrine channels was rarely changed, and that single sponge passed germs from person to person all day long. The warm public baths were often shared by the sick and the healthy together, and the Romans gathered human waste from the cities and spread it onto their fields as fertilizer, which fed the crops and fed the worms and sent the eggs right back to the dinner table. They even had a beloved fish sauce, fermented and shipped across the whole empire, which appears to have carried fish tapeworm far and wide. So the Romans built some of the most impressive plumbing of the ancient world, and still could not win the invisible war, because they were fighting an enemy they could not see and did not understand, which leaves us with the deepest question of all. Why was this one simple act so impossibly hard to get right? Step back and look at the whole long struggle at once. For 100,000 years, going to the bathroom was nothing. You walked away, you crouched, you went, and the open world took care of the rest. It was the easiest thing a body ever did. And then we did one thing. We stayed. We gathered together into villages, towns, and finally cities. And that single choice turned the easiest act in the world into one of the deadliest problems our species has ever faced. Because the real enemy was invisible. Not the smell, not the mess, but the unseen life inside the waste. The eggs and the microbes that slip from waste to water to hand to mouth and quietly take a body apart from the inside. For almost all of history, we fought that enemy completely blind. We had no idea that germs existed. People dug drains and built sewers not because they could see the danger, but because they could smell it. And because, near filth, people simply died. That is why these clumsy, brilliant inventions matter so much. The stone drains of Skara Brae, the brick sewers of the Indus, the flushing seat at Knossos, the great cloaca of Rome, every one of them was a blind swing at an enemy no one could even picture. And notice how human the whole journey is. We argued about privacy, sitting shoulder to shoulder in Rome, then craving a locked door of our own. We turned the most basic act into something tangled up with shame, with status, and with manners. But underneath all of it sits one of the most important inventions in human history, one we almost never celebrate and rarely even mention. The simple, world-changing idea of carrying our own waste safely away from our own water. That idea, more than almost any battle or any king, is the reason great cities could exist at all without rotting from within. Every time you close a door and a clean rush of water carries the problem away, you are using a solution that cost our ancestors thousands of years and countless lives. Grug, squatting in the open grass 50,000 years ago, could never have dreamed of marble seats and underground rivers. But every drain and pipe and quiet private room grew from the exact same moment he knew so well. The oldest feeling there is, the body that will not wait, and a clever, stubborn animal, slowly learning how to live close together without making itself sick. So how did ancient humans go to the bathroom? For most of our story, they simply walked away, crouched down, and let the wide, moving world absorb it, wiping with leaves and moss and stones and broken bits of pottery. But the moment we stopped wandering and settled down, that simple act became a quiet war against an invisible enemy, and the toilet became one of the greatest, least celebrated inventions we ever made. From the stone drains of Orkney to the sewers of the Indus and the latrines of Rome, our ancestors fought, blind for thousands of years, to keep their waste from killing them. They lost more of that war than they ever knew. But every time they dug a drain or poured the water through, they were quietly building the world that made you possible. Next time, we'll stay with the body and its oldest needs and ask another question you have asked since you were a child. Why do we sleep at all? And how on earth did ancient humans rest through cold, dark, dangerous nights with no walls and no beds? Until then, spare a kind thought for the clever, crouching, stubborn ancestors you came from. This was Grug.